Welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. 36 hours since the United States launched that Operation Epic Fury into Iran. We're looking live right now there in Tel Aviv in Israel, and it looks very quiet. This as Iran saying they're threatened to retaliate in a major way. We're also learning new information here on this Sunday as 3 U.S. service members were killed, at least 5 seriously wounded in this war against Iran. This from the U.S. Central Command, the first American casualties since the U.S. and Israel launched those strikes on Saturday. And of course, the United States also taking out the Iranian supreme leader earlier on, as well as plenty in his inner circle. Let's be joined right now here by friend of the program, FDD Executive Director Jonathan Schanzer. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. What can you tell us at this point? What are you monitoring? What's key to this retaliation and how the United States, as they say, will achieve all of their objectives? What are you watching?
Well, a couple things I'm watching right now. I think first is that it appears that Israel and the United States have achieved air superiority inside Iran. That means that the air defenses of the Islamic Republic are really no longer. This is what happened during the 12-day war last year when Israel was dominating the skies over Iran. I think we're seeing this pretty much again. And I think that's important because it just means that the Israelis and the United States are going to be able to go hunting for the top leaders, for the missiles, for some of the other, military infrastructure that they're looking to dismantle. So I think that's number one. Number two is, of course, the complete disarray within the upper echelons of the Islamic Republic. It's not just the supreme leader, but he had a replacement that I don't think lasted more than 6-7 hours before he was killed. The defense minister gone. The number that we heard yesterday was something like 40 different senior officials, all liquidated within the first 24 hours of the conflict. So it does raise questions about how much longer the regime can hang on for. As far as the division of labor, I think that's also been interesting. I mean, it looks like the Israelis were going after the top leaders and hunting for missiles. The United States was looking for nuclear infrastructure and apparently now also underground infrastructure, including some of those missile silos. Obviously, the regime has been able to squeeze off some shots. And we've seen some pretty significant strikes in Israel. A number of people killed, a number of people injured. The same now that we've learned, where sadly 3 U.S. service members and another 4 or 5 U.S. service members were injured after the 3 were killed. So we're learning a lot right now about the kind of the pace of this battle. Everybody on the U.S. and the Israeli side seem to think things are going well. And I think the regime is hanging on for dear life, but I do get a sense also that we could be in for a full month or more of this, according to folks that I'm talking to. And of course, that's going to be a grueling thing for American service members out in the Middle East, and it'll be a grueling thing for Israelis. And don't forget also all these other Arab countries that are coming under fire by the Islamic Republic. This is, this is no joke. This is a real war in the Middle East, and it may last for a month or more.
Yeah, Trump kind of reiterating that, saying 4 weeks it might last with this until all those objectives are achieved. You mentioned the supreme leader as the United States, Israel taking him out and several around him. Is there a power vacuum right now? Who's in charge necessarily of the IRGC?
Well, so there's a guy named Ali Larijani who is the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. He was actually tapped by the now deceased supreme leader to be the man who would be in charge. We're also seeing a pretty significant role being played by Arakchi, the foreign minister. So there are individuals that are stepping up into the breach. Although I've got to say, I'm not sure how long they're going to be around for, because the Israelis are clearly hunting for those top leaders. and they're taking them out one after the next. They don't see the difference between pragmatic and radical leaders within the Islamic Republic. It's their assessment that if you're part of the Islamic Republic, then you are part of the problem. This is, I think, it's a broad brush that they're painting everyone with right now. But I think ultimately, the Israelis and the Iranian people are probably on the same page here, which is that you don't want to see remnants of the regime taking over and making deals, let's say cutting down their nuclear stockpile by half or their missiles by half. At this point, from the Israeli perspective, I think from the Iranian perspective, probably from the United States perspective too, this is binary. Either the regime is in power or it's not, and they would prefer that it not. There are questions, though, about who comes after. And that, I think, is probably the thing that is the most befuddling to analysts and, the news, the news outlets that are covering this. A lot of people have been talking about Reza Shah Pahlavi, the crown prince, so-called crown prince in waiting or crown prince in exile of the former Shah. The idea that he would take over or that we would install him is not sitting well with a lot of people. I think for obvious reasons. As a democracy trying to bring stability to the region, the idea that we would install a monarch does not sit well with some. There are others. There's a group called the MEK, Mujahideen al-Khalq. They are a Marxist radical organization that's been designated as a terrorist organization here in the United States. They're trying to make a play for power. So I think there's a vacuum that folks are seeing that is likely to open up. And I think we've got days and weeks ahead where there will be some confusion about who steps in. It'll be important that we pick the right people for this role.
And you mentioned this might not be binary, or this might be binary. It's either one way, the IRGC, or a entirely different path. But is there any potential possibility for diplomacy that they can say that, hey, they're not going to try to access any nuclear weapons? Is that window closed entirely?
Look, I don't want to say that it's closed. I do actually see maybe some room for what we would call the Venezuela option, right? Where the United States could be on the horn with folks from within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, from within the IRGC. They're several rungs down from the top leaders. Maybe they're more pragmatic. Maybe they're afraid of American weaponry. Maybe they just don't want to see their country get destroyed from weeks of war. And so there is the possibility that they're doing outreach to the Trump administration, the CIA, the DIA. Maybe those conversations are happening right now. But again, I think, there's going to be some friction. The Israelis don't want anybody from the IRGC taking over, nor do the people of Iran, who truly hate the regime that has kept them poverty-stricken and devoid of rights for decades now. There will be, I think, some friction over this. It doesn't mean that we can't potentially move forward if you find the right people. But, I think the important thing to remember here is in Venezuela, it was a kleptocracy, but ideologically, it was pretty bankrupt. There was really not much there. With the Islamic Republic, people have been brought up on this radical ideology. They are true believers. And it's for that reason, I think there will be concern about allowing for any remnants of this regime to hold on to power. People will be concerned about the resurrection of the Islamic Republic's revolutionary ideology. That's what we don't want to see. After all the munitions that we've spent, the immense effort leading up to the war. Remember, we've been in the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean now. Our soldiers have been there for almost 5 weeks. And now there's a war that's underway. We don't want to make a deal with the wrong people. And I think that's something to watch here. I'm not saying the president is going in that direction. I don't even know if he's tempted. But I mean, these are the sorts of things, the conversations that are starting to happen about, well, what does the future hold for the Islamic Republic? And how do we find that off ramp from this war? We just need to be careful here that we're not making deals with the wrong people and that we're putting the Islamic Republic on the right path. This isn't necessarily engineering a regime or a regime change. At least that's not where we are now, but it could be where we steer things in another couple of days or a couple of weeks.
And that will take some time. And also, another interesting note from President Trump's his most recent comments. He also said it again several days ago, talking about immunity for some of those that probably try to get out of that. Is that the olive branch from President Trump to say, hey, you can no longer be a part of this? We will kind of grant you that immunity?
Well, look, I mean, we've seen these sorts of things before. De-Baathification, if you remember that from the Iraq War of 2003, 2004. What happened afterwards is we were trying to make sure that there wasn't a complete brain drain, that people who knew how to run the country could continue to run it. There was also this question of, trying to entice people to step away from the regime that we were trying to bring down. So this is not surprising. I think the big question that a lot of folks are going to ask is, at what level do you offer that amnesty? In other words, if you are a senior cleric or a senior IRGC official with blood on your hands, should you get immunity? Should you be given that olive branch? And I think, again, there will be some friction over this, given how horrible this regime was to its own people, given how horrible this regime was and to the entire region, not just the Israelis, but the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Bahrainis. They've all suffered at the hands of this regime, including just over the last 24 hours or so, right? A lot of these countries have been hit with missiles and drones fired by the regime. There will be a long memory here of the way that this regime treated the surrounding neighbors, and neighbors may not be willing to allow for that olive branch.
That's what I was going to ask you, because you mentioned how the United States, how Israel, they're hunting some of the leaders and also kind of the missile silos or bases there. In terms of what Iran is doing in their attacks on Israel and other neighboring countries in that region, does that strategy signal anything to you, and why potentially they are doing this?
Look, let me just say, I think there is a strategy right now of the United States and Israel doing what needs to be done to remove this threat. That's the foremost strategy here, right? It's nuclear, it's missiles, it's the leaders of the regime, it's the military infrastructure that has propped them up. That is the primary strategy. There is, I think, kind of a broader question, which is, now that the entire region is enjoying the defensive architecture provided by the United States and Central Command, and that we're watching CENTCOM provide intelligence and provide missile defense, not just to the Israelis, but to everyone in the region that is part of that American-led alliance structure. What does this do? Does this start to forge new relationships? Is there an understanding that being part of the U.S.-led alliance means letting go of ancient grievances and letting go of, some of these long and nasty memories that have kept the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict alive in the region? I think we could be watching a reorientation, if you will, but I think so much of this is going to hinge on success. In other words, do they topple the regime? Can they maintain a certain amount of stability in Iran after the regime has been toppled? And if the answer is yes, then I think there is a wider strategy, a diplomatic strategy that feeds into that military strategy that appears to be working so far. But let me just say, Andy, there is still a lot of fighting to be done. Air defenses are not hermetic. You're seeing some of those air defenses let some missiles through. That means damage in the Arab world. It means damage in Israel. It means damage to American, vessels. There will be setbacks. There will be steps backward in this war. But I think that if the Israelis and the United States stick to what appears to be a pretty solid war plan right now, and the Arabs have patience to allow for this to play out, I see some potentially very positive outcomes here. And And that's obviously what I'm cheering for.
Yeah, patience is another key with this could last 4 weeks. And President Trump also saying there are likely going to be more casualties. Already 3 U.S. service members losing their lives in terms of this. You mentioned the nature of this. The net is very wide. The Iron Dome is very strong, but it's not perfect. There have already been strikes in Israel and other nations as well. In terms of what we're seeing there, last year it felt like the response from Iran, it lacked sophistication. It lacked any power. Are we seeing a different tone? Are they showing a little bit more strength than they did potentially last year?
Actually, as I'm hearing it right now, so far they look weaker and less organized. And that's interesting to me because they've had a lot of time to prepare. But as I understand it, some 20 hours into the war yesterday, they had only been able to squeeze off about 180 missiles. I think we're probably up to maybe 200 or maybe even a little bit more now that went into Israeli airspace. Of course, there have been other attacks that we've seen in the Arab world. And this is really, in many cases, the first time that we're watching this integrated air defense system kick into high gear. I think it's working, but I think that the Iranian strategy seems to be somewhat blunt. They don't appear to be getting close to the strategic targets in Israel that they probably were aiming for. So far, it looks like they're hitting civilian infrastructure. In other words, war crimes. But they don't appear to be able to penetrate Israeli defenses in places that matter most to them, at least so far. And so I think what they're finding is that they have to go into some of these civilian areas, and that's where they're focusing, at least for the moment. I'm hearing though that in some cases the Israelis are able to target the missiles before they're launched. I'm hearing that the Israelis are targeting missile launchers. These are more static, and there are far fewer of them. And the more that are removed from the battlefield, the harder it's going to be for the regime to fire missiles. I'm hearing that in some cases, they need to fuel the missiles before they're able to fire them. The liquid fuel missiles can take 2 to 3 hours, and that leaves them as sitting ducks out in the middle of the desert in Western Iran, and the Israelis have been able to strike. So, overall, at least for now, I'm not seeing an impressive showing by the Islamic Republic. Again, I think the Israelis and the United States have air superiority, which means they can, there's barely, if any, air defenses, which means that they can go around hunting for whatever they want, in close proximity to population centers and to military bases without real fear of getting hit. So I think the Iranian regime is reeling. It doesn't mean that they're gone. It means that they're in trouble, and I think they're trying to find their footing again with new leaders. I think what the thing that I would maybe just observe here is that they do appear to be more durable than anybody thought. After the rounds of strikes that we've seen, it was an enormous number of strikes yesterday, 1,000 plus by the United States, 500-600 from the Israelis, and that was just on day one. And the regime is still holding, at least for now.
Yeah, the patience, the persistence of all of this, because the United States also launching those B-2 bombers with 2,000-pound bombs, taking out some of those missile kind of bases for Iran. I do want to ask you about what's going on there, because you mentioned that it's going to take some time. They're durable for this time being. They kind of put the window at 4 weeks, and then there's obviously a rough timeline of things. If we're kind of moving forward over the next several days, what signals are you looking that it might be moving in the right direction, that the shift might have been felt in Iran?
Well, I mean, I'm definitely watching the people of Iran. They just suffered immense tragedy. 30, 40,000 people slaughtered in the streets for the crime of coming out to protest their oppressive regime. They went back inside and they didn't want to come back out again. I think we're starting to see some additional protests. But I mean, I think the big question, and Donald Trump has called upon the people of Iran to come out and and reclaim their country. I'm watching to see the signs of that, because I think they felt abandoned at one point. They felt like we had left them out to dry. Now I think they're probably really feeling like, we're absolutely in their corner, and it will be up to them to retake the initiative. So I'm watching that. But I think the one thing that I just want to counsel here is, there's a sense in the United States and maybe around the world that, we're the most powerful military. The United States military is second to none. And so it should just be easy to do this. I think what folks need to understand is there is no handbook for taking out a rogue state. There is no step-by-step process through which you are guaranteed success. The president has taken a risk. The Israelis have taken a risk. And right now, they're working together with some of the best intelligence services in the world, trying to figure out where the weak spots are within the regime that can be exploited, and ultimately that will enable the U.S. and Israel to bring about the downfall of this regime. But it is a risk still, and it will be trial and error. There is no guaranteed path forward. They're doing the best that they can with the capabilities that they can and the limitations that they have. And that, I think, is that's the guidance that I think we all need to understand. There will undoubtedly be moments where the American public will lose patience. Certainly when we see fallen soldiers, that is going to, I'm sure, stoke frustration and maybe some high emotions. But I think we need to just understand that this is a regime that has done an enormous amount of damage. It has wreaked havoc across the Middle East for nearly 50 years, a half a century. This is undoing that right now. If it goes the way that Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu hope that it does, this is, I think, the first step that we've taken over the last 24, 36 hours in what will be several steps and a process that plays out that hopefully brings down this regime and enables a certain amount of stability to come back to the Middle East. I got to tell you, I've not been alive at a time when the Middle East has been stable. Donald Trump has a vision for it. So do the Israelis. I'd love to see it play out in a positive way. No guarantees here, but they're taking the risks and they're doing whatever they can to try to bring about that outcome.
Yeah, lots of risk, and obviously 3 U.S. service members losing their lives. And he said there likely be more in terms of this. I also want to ask you an interesting note because it feels like intelligence is so very important and vital in this circumstance with what we took out with the Ayatollah. I want to ask you because we saw what happened in Austin, Texas, back here at home, and they said it's a nexus of terrorism, and there's no real indication that they're tied together. But there's also concern about that. Are you wary in that regard at all that Iran can pull something like that off, that they're are militarizing other people around the globe? Is that a concern for you? Should people be worried of that?
Look, it's a concern, but whether we should be worried about it or not, I mean, let me just say, I think we should be leaving that to the FBI to be worried about it, and the CIA and the National Security Council to be thinking about those things. We have seen the regime in Iran deploy contractors to try to kill the Saudi ambassador, the Israeli ambassador. We've seen plots against Masih Alinejad, a prominent activist on behalf of the Iranian people, trying to bring down the regime. We've seen plots against Brian Hook and Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump himself. I mean, officials that were pretty outspoken as it related to the regime and and its status here in the United States as a state sponsor of terrorism, and some of the efforts that we've had underway here to isolate them economically or to bring them down, through subterfuge, through intelligence methods, or now by military force. So I would expect that the regime could try to do this. My hope, of course, is that the FBI is all over this. And I'm going to expect that they are. I think they have seen the writing on the wall about a possible confrontation between the Islamic Republic and the Trump administration. For the last year, we have watched this, the tension build. And so I think the Bureau is ready. But obviously, there's a lot that maybe they can't see, but I think they're, as far as goalies go, they're doing pretty well so far. They've got a shutout going against the Islamic Republic, and we're going to hope that they continue to block every shot that the regime tries to put on net.
Yeah, we're only 36 hours into what could be a 4-week ordeal as the strike's happening early Saturday morning. All right, Jonathan, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your insight. Always so valuable here on Live Now.